Go ahead and redeem the time here effectively, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'm joined by my co-chair, Steve Glover, and we have with us members of the planning staff that are working with NashvilleNext. So Mr. Bernhardt and Jennifer, we're glad to have you here with us. And so I'll just go ahead and turn the program over to you, Mr. Bernhardt, and let you walk us through this update on the NashvilleNext plan.
Okay. Okay. What I'd like to do today is to bring the council up kind of as to, this will work? Up to where we are on the NashvilleNext or the general plan. Let you know kind of what some of the next steps are, because we've got several opportunities to engage the council, and then open it up really for some questions, and I'll do part of it and Jennifer will do part of it. So what we're interested in going through today is why are we doing this? What's the process? What's happening now where we can use your help and focus on it? So first, why are we planning now? And we're at a major change in this community as well as in the country in terms of the changing demographics, changing household types and all. And so focusing on understanding what those changes are and then helping us plan for them is going to be critical as we go forward. We've been very successful as a community, and in the last couple of years everybody knows we're kind of a spot where you hear everything and are moving forward, but we want to make sure that we do that. We also have some issues in terms of the economy, in terms of how do we position ourselves to continue to move forward, and changing issues as we go forward. First, let's just kind of start off. This region will grow by over 1 million people over the next 25 years. We'll be over 3 million people. And the interesting part about that is that while Davidson County will continue to grow, will be over 800,000 people by that time, Rutherford and Williamson County will also grow significantly. Both of those counties will be over 500,000 people by 2040. They'll be larger than Davidson County was in 2000. So there's going to be some, obviously, a continuation of the need for regional cooperation and regional coordination as we go forward. The most significant changes may be in terms of population diversity, and these numbers are not particularly unique to Nashville, but they do reflect changes in Davidson County over the next 25 years. Davidson County in 2040, the largest single ethnic group in 2040 will be Latinos. They'll make up about 34% of the population. Whites will make up about 32%. African Americans 27 or 28% by 2040. That's not particularly because of immigration. That's because of household structure and birth rates. And there's relatively little that can be done to change that. It's just kind of where we're at. And so understanding that and understanding what the implications of that are going to be is going to be a key part of the planning process. And we started our speaker series actually talking about that and helping people understand what those changes were. The population between now and 2040 is going to be made up, it's not a population bell curve at all. It's going to be made up of two predominant age groups, the aging boomers being roughly, I mean nationally you're talking about 80 million people, but you're also talking about the same or a larger number of Gen Ys. Both of those groups have certain implications in terms of the type of community and household needs we have. The Gen Y group are looking, they're primarily much smaller households, and they are looking for more strategic in terms of their locations where they can provide access to services, access to transportation, where time is not spent in a commute, and so the housing need and the locational needs of those as well as the aging boomers, which are predominantly people, the projections are that about 95% of all boomers want to age in place or age in neighborhoods where they can get around. So being able to get around when you may not be able to drive a car is going to be a critical component of this, both for both Gen Ys and for aging boomers as we go forward. Obesity continues to be an issue. The Health Department's Healthy Communities Initiative is a key component of this plan, but it will be one in terms of that to some degree the design of our communities, the ability to walk, the ability to have a mixture of land uses and housing will be able to deal with. Education is probably the #1 issue. I don't think there was any surprises here. But we've got significant issues in regard to education. I think that trying to find an answer to that may be the biggest challenge that we'll have as we go through the next 25 years, as you all well know about that. And this illustrates kind of the spread between the schools that have the highest achievement on the ACT and those that have the lowest achievement on the ACT. These are all different metro public schools. So there's a disparity between different schools even within the public school system in terms of success or achievement on the ACT. This is complemented by the fact that by the fact that we are going to need higher and higher education for the jobs that are coming about. There's very little, in fact, there's less and less need for GED or entry level and much more need for a 4-year college degree and advanced degrees, especially in the areas of mathematics, engineering, et cetera. Nashville historically has had more people than jobs. However, by 2040, for the first time, really by 2030, we'll begin to see more jobs than people. So the regional role of the county is going to continue to increase. Getting people in and out of the county is going to continue to be a key issue as we go forward, and we'll be looking at that. There's some of the commuting patterns. Again, you're seeing a lot of commuting from Rutherford and Wilson counties, and so a lot of the work that we'll be doing on transportation is trying to find ways to successfully integrate workers and jobs. Maybe the biggest challenge that the council is going to have is how do we fund infrastructure? The projections are that over the next 5 years, there's a demand for about $5 billion, a little less than $5 billion in infrastructure needs, water, sewer, roads, transportation, et cetera. Over the last 5 years, we've only been able to fund about $1 billion. So how we strategically decide what infrastructure investments to make will be a key component as we go forward, because there simply isn't enough money to kind of keep the status quo going as we have in the past. And so how do we use it and spend our money efficiently? Climate change, I don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but there are issues with regard to mitigation, location of development, and implications that we'll be involving the community with as we go forward. We started this process, and many of you took part in this, with a community-wide survey. We interviewed, we had a polling company interview 1,000 people in Davidson County, 1,000 people outside of Davidson County, and a little over 100 thought leaders on much more extensive one-on-one interviews. Many of y'all were part of that. And the interesting thing was that the time is right for the community to come together and begin to plan. As you see here, there's a strong recognition that Nashville is a world-class city, and that planning is on the right track. We need to keep going, and people want to be involved. So we've seen this as we've started the community engagement process, that people are very excited and want to be involved in that. So with that, I'll let Jennifer talk a little bit about the background. I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'll scoot over and you can.
Okay. There we go. All right, thank you. Okay, so in terms of bringing you up to speed on what we've been doing thus far and the structure of the plan and the planning process, this is how we've been talking about Nashville Next, a 2-year process that's going to plan for the next 25 years. It's a real integrated effort. You'll see that when I go through all of the different topics that are going to be discussed by the community, and it's really drawing on the needs, ideas, and input of Nashvillians. And I think the community engagement is taken to a level that we haven't done before. And so we're really excited to engage you and your networks in that as well. In terms of the plan goals, we've got 5 of those listed here. You can see that they're about economic development, expanding choices for residents in terms of housing, education, employment, definitely hitting on efficient provision of public services, sustainability and environmentally sound development practices, and then neighborhood livability, which has been something that we've been talking about a lot here in Nashville recently. These are the elements that we anticipate the plan encompassing. There may be additional topics that come out as we're working with the community, but these are the ones that kind of rose to the top when we were doing our early polling of Nashvillians and our interviews with thought leaders here in Nashville. In terms of how we've structured our thinking about the plan and the steering committee and our community engagement committee and like that, we've been thinking in terms of 4 pillars that work together: efficient government, prosperous economy, healthy environment, and diversity and equitable cultures and communities here in Davidson County. And so with that, we've reached out and partnered with 3 other groups: the Nashville Chamber of Commerce, the Land Trust for Tennessee, and Nashville for All of Us, to help us think through the structure of the planning process itself. Then our broader steering committee also reaches in to look and work with groups that think more regionally, like the Transit Alliance, Conexión Americas, Cumberland Region Tomorrow, and the Metropolitan Planning Organization, to work with folks that think more about urban design, like the Civic Design Center and like that. And so it's pretty broad as well. And here's the members of the steering committee. The emphasis and a lot of the heavy lifting, however, goes with our community engagement committee, because getting out with the community in a variety of different ways that Rick will go into more detail about, that's been the main thrust of our work thus far. So the community engagement committee tries to represent a lot of different constituencies within Davidson County. The 2 folks whose names are in bold are our chairs, Carolyn Blackwell and Ashford Hughes. They were chosen by the other members of the Community Engagement Committee. So just in the broadest terms, here's our approach. This process is trying to involve the public continuously throughout the process. We're going to be working online, and our online tools are already available if your constituents prefer to work online. We're also going to be doing our more traditional community meetings, although the content of those meetings will be a little atraditional in terms of getting people up and about and moving quite a bit more. And then also we're doing a lot of let us come to you. If you have a pre-existing event, a community meeting, you can have us come out and we will visit with you and your group and get their input right on the spot where they were already meeting. So we will come to you. We take that community visioning to work with local topical experts in developing some alternatives for the public to consider. So the public tells me that they're interested in crime prevention. And then we have topical experts that are helping us think through how crime patterns may change in the future based on driving forces, trends outside of Davidson County and like that. And they give the community then some ideas that they can respond to. And the community gets to weigh in on those alternatives and help us set up the goals and objectives based on that. And that's that final bullet, is making sure these other elements, such as safety and education and healthy living, making sure they drive our land use decisions. Right now we're in our visioning schedule and phase where we're working with the community to kind of refine and finalize their vision. And for you all, one of the ways this is going to come up is you're very accustomed, I know, to our community planning efforts where folks go out and can go neighborhood by neighborhood and block by block and say, I'd like a sidewalk on XYZ street. And this will look more like, okay, I'm hearing you say that walkability is important to you. And so we will pass on those specific suggestions to the appropriate departments or entities. But this planning effort is going to be thinking more broadly about, okay, how are we going to achieve walkability? Where are we going to prioritize our resources? What are our goals for the future and like that? Then we'll move into some alternatives where, having worked with the resource teams to help us think through those driving forces, what's going to be impacting our health in our neighborhoods in the future, then they'll help come up with some alternatives that the community can respond to. Okay, if we see that there are continuing to be increased rates of obesity and other health issues, then how are we going to respond to that? Community, help us think that through. And then once we distill those alternatives and those scenarios, then we'll put that into our final plan with goals and objectives and measurable deliverables that we can track in the coming years. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Rick to talk about what we're doing right now.
Okay, right now, as Jennifer said, we're in the process of doing community visioning. And we started that basically with a kickoff that I know many of you were involved with on February 16th at the library. But as I mentioned, we started initially with a series of background reports and background papers and a community interview. These were the top priorities, and I'm not sure that there's any surprise here, but it was interesting to kind of have these priorities affirmed as we went through that process. Public education being the #1 priority, job creation, and public safety being the next two, almost as heavy. But then clean air and water, clean energy, equal opportunities regardless of race, income, and religion, homelessness, all were very high priority issues. Some of these were a little surprising as we kind of got through there, but they're not, I think they reflect the changing diversity and the changing importance of community and neighborhoods as we go forward. We also, when we did the thought leaders, it really followed much the same thing. Education, economic development, job creation, and transit here picked up a little higher interest than the community at large. Walkable neighborhoods was also very high, and redevelopment of rundown areas was high. But education and economic development and job creation are critical elements, and I think all of us would tend to think about that and start with that from the very beginning. The kickoff, as I mentioned, was on February 16th at the library. We had about 400 to 500 people there. We had 304 individual sign-ins. We took a lot of input in terms of the way that we could take input as we went through that. We had comment cards, over 150 were returned. One thing that was said on those, 4 out of 5, our 88% felt like that this was worth their time to attend that, and 100% indicated that they would attend another event, so that it was worth their time and that they wanted to have more information on that. But we took information from a number of different ways, using social media, using our graphic artist and all. Let's see what we've got here. We've got, they reflected, I think the people there reflected a lot of the changes in diversity of the community as we go forward. We had activities for kids to participate in, and they enjoyed that. We took visioning in many of the ways that y'all might have taken it in the past, with sticky notes and other ways that we took information. We had video cameras that we took information. We had a lot of different ways. We had a wheel that you spun and you could write on, and we took pictures of that. We had the graphic artist to take that, to take information from and draw it up as people were suggesting it. We're in the middle right now of a community speaker series that is intended to help educate the community on the key issues that are part of this plan. And I'm going to run some clips from this, because I think that what was shared with us and with the community was extremely important. We've had 3 so far. Paris Glendening, former governor of Maryland. We've had Mitchell Silver, who's the president of the American Planning Association. Henry Cisneros, president of City View, former secretary of Housing and Urban Development. So with that, we're going to run some of their comments.
You have an important voice in that coming future. And this forum is a critical step in shaping the next Nashville. As you all know better than I, Nashville has been growing and is projected to continue to grow. Over the next 25 years, almost another 200,000 people will call Davidson County their home. This coming growth demands very important decisions. You must decide now how you want Nashville to be in 2040. Now, I know that the challenge that you face may at first seem daunting, but let me just say this. As I travel across the country, working with groups just like you, and give speeches in places like the upper Midwest, where they've lost population in recent years, where they continue to lose jobs, where people are leaving vacant homes in abandoned neighborhoods and boarded up storefronts, or in parts of the West and the South and the Sun Belt, where the housing crisis has hit communities so very, very high. When I think of these communities where I've been, I can tell you that they would, in a moment, trade all of their problems for one day of the future that you have. We must remember that cities do not develop by happenstance. Everyday decisions are made about where investments are to be, about who is served by those investments, and what those investments will look like. That's why planning today is essential to ensure that all of these decisions support your vision of what you want for the next Nashville. And I must emphasize, it is not ours, the speakers, it is not the mayors, it is not the planning departments. It is your vision that will guide where this wonderful community goes.
I like to set the context for planning because most people don't understand what planning is all about. And planning is primarily a response to growth and change. And in our country, we have a history of change. And I don't know if you knew this, but back in the 19th century, there were only 5 million people in our country with an urbanized population of roughly 6%. And then because of the immigration, primarily from Europe, in the late 19th century and early 20th century, our population swelled to 76 million. By the 21st century, we're around a little over 300 million today, and you can see where we're headed as a country. This is a change that as planners and as policymakers and elected officials that we have to deal with. Different regions will be affected differently, and that is why we have to plan. And believe me, there are places in this country that do not want to plan. So what does this mean for us? Over the next 50 years, we have to figure out where to accommodate 124 million people in the United States. That's what's coming our way. So people say, I don't want to grow. You might as well say you don't want it to rain. These people are coming because a lot of, at least a third of this number are just people having children. So this is the growth we're expected in this country. We'll also need 40 to 50 million housing units to accommodate this population. And believe it or not, the region in this country that's going to see the most growth is the South, more so than the West. And so these are some of the changes we're going to have to experience. And you heard the number. You're expected 1 million of that number to be here over the next 20 years in the Nashville metro region. So the question is, what will the next generation of development look like and communities look like? There are also consequences for making no decision and no action. In fact, I see that more of a tragedy across the country where people say, I don't believe you, I'm going to deny it, I'm going to put my head in the sand. There are consequences for saying no and taking no action. And that is a concern that I see, whether it's for this region or any region in the country. When you say no to something, there are consequences, and you have to have a conversation about what that is. And when we work with residents in our community and they say no to something, the question is, they're saying yes to something else. What are you saying yes to? It's easy to say no. In our community, I told the residents, when you say no to multi-housing, what you're saying is, yes, seniors and young people, we don't want you in our community. Is that what you're really saying? And so we were able to have a conversation. When you say no, because that's a very popular term in the planning movement, as you all know, you're saying yes to something else, and you have to find out what they're saying yes to.
For whatever reason, we're seeing a trend in household size. Fewer people are getting married, and they're having less children. By 2030, for the first time in American history, the predominant household is going to be one person, not a family, one person. So that has huge implications to the communities we build. Will a single person drive 10, 15, 20 miles to live in a single family home, 4,000, 5,000 square feet? The answer is probably not. So what's going to happen to our housing market or cities that thrive on single family, that it will not be able to keep up with the changing demographics of the households? So at least in Raleigh, we made sure we're providing options. We're looking, in fact, our hottest market is multifamily housing. and rentals, which in some neighborhoods they feel that it's going to destroy their property values. In our community, it's enhancing property values. And so those are some of the changes we're going to expect. That's probably the biggest dynamic, aging and the change in household size, that's forcing us to reset how we think about planning, at least for the next 30 years.
Nashville and Davidson County, it strikes me, have a textbook diversity of economic sectors. If you were to study the American economy of the last 50 years, you would see in very dramatic ways the transformation from the American economy that fueled urban America in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and the economy that has created the new, not just the new American economy, but the new urban economy. I went to church in Phoenix one Sunday, and the priest recognized me, so he asked me to come out and stand with him at the back of the church as the people were coming out. And every man I greeted was in the construction business. You could tell by the calloused hands and the dirty boots, and when I asked them, that's what they told me. And I went out to the parking lot and saw all the pickup trucks with Martinez and Sons, or Nundas and Sons, a wheelbarrow in the back and some tools. And that's, to me, not just an economic development strategy, but that's wealth. That's the difference between working for somebody and putting some wealth together, having a net worth. That's the ability to grow a business and employ some people. That's the ability to hand it off within the family and create intergenerational wealth. So we can intentionally create economic strategies that are tilted in the direction of that kind of, social progress. I believe in that, and it's an untested idea, but I believe that that's an important direction for us, and it makes life better in our communities. It's a much better strategy than social welfare, income maintenance, if you give people a chance to work.
So that's just a sample of kind of some of the ideas that have been discussed during the speaker series. I think each one of them has been challenging. I know those of y'all that have had an opportunity to participate in them have hopefully found them to be both challenging and really thought-provoking. Each one of these speeches are available. You can watch them just on our website, NashvilleNext.net website. You can watch the presentations fully. We have them all up there on YouTube, but linked through that. We also, following night of each one of these presentations, we go to Channel 5 Plus, their open line series, and members of the steering committee or members of the people that are involved in this will be there for an hour discussion with the host and phone-in questions, so that the community has another opportunity to kind of mull over the thoughts and the ideas there. One thing that it's been interesting here, we've kind of been tracking the people that have been participating. The numbers you see on here are the numbers of Davidson County, and the dots are kind of where we are. So basically we've got a few less males participate than the county at large. We've got a few more females there. We've got generally underrepresented in renters and overrepresented in owners. So we're trying to keep up with the different people that are participating in this. As we've gone through, going back to those 8 areas that we were talking about, these are comments, specific comments. We've kind of tallied them as to what has been important to the people that have commented. Transportation, land use, infrastructure has been the highest commented on, livable and healthy communities, and you can kind of get a sense of that. But arts and culture is one that's particularly interesting because it's not just arts and culture as an amenity, but arts and culture as an economic development tool and the role that it plays in supporting the economic development opportunities of the community. We also have on the NashvilleNext.net page an kind of a crowdsourcing tool and technique called Mind Mixer. People, the community at large, anybody you have could go in and submit an idea. People can like the idea, they can comment on the idea, they can submit an alternative idea, but it's a way, again, for us to get participation. We've had a lot of activity on that page in terms of people making suggestions and ideas to kind of go forward. We also have, and this one may be of particular importance, what we're calling Book a Planner. And this is what Jennifer mentioned, that if you have an organization or a group, a neighborhood group, or anything that's out there, let us know, and we'll be glad to come out and do a visioning process with them, a small process. We've done this in a number of them so far, and we're continuing to do this. And it's maybe us reaching out to them. Let us go to your group instead of asking them to come to us, and we hope that this will be an opportunity to engage people that haven't historically been engaged as part of the planning process. The departments are all going to be engaged even more than they have been so far. As we get specific in requests, as Jennifer mentioned, we'll be passing those on. But more importantly, we're starting with the plans that the departments have, and are trying to make sure that they're coordinated with each other and with other plans that have taken place. Another key resource that we have undertaken is to ask the community to develop a background report. So far, we have 4 of those completed, and they're kind of released as we have the speakers on that topic. But we've released education, economic development, arts and culture, and equity and inclusion. Each of those, again, are available for download, the reports. What we've asked, and they're made, the authors of these are local community experts generally on the topic, and what we asked them to do was to give us a little information about the state of the art in whatever the topic was, what's the state of Nashville on the topic, and then what are some recommendations or ideas that ought to be considered as part of the plan process. And the whole purpose of this background report, or reports, is as we get into the topics, is to give us a starting point, this and the community visioning, to give us a starting point to discuss issues that are important to the community. We'll be releasing 2 more, I guess, end of this week, and 4 more following. The rest of them will be coming out as we go through the rest of the speaker series. We also have, and again, we also have available, and I guess we've got that in your packet, actually a 2-page summary, I think all these are, 2-page summaries of the background report that has the key findings from that report. Much of it is infographics and basic information, but those are available once again for download. What we would, if you see some of these, you want to distribute them, we'd be glad to provide you PDF copies that you can send out or whatever would be convenient for you. But these kind of talk about the key issues that we're dealing with. The community visioning process is going to be supported by what we're referring to as resource teams. Each of these topics will have a resource team of about 15 people, plus including the background paper authors and the relevant departments, that will be looking at what is the feedback from the community visioning, and then putting a little kind of reality check to that. Does this work? How do we make this work? How do we incorporate that? And what they're doing, what the resource teams will be doing over the next 1.5 to 2 years, is identifying what are the major forces that are confronting Nashville that may be very unique to us or maybe more general, but that really will affect the future. As we get more and more information from the public, what they'll do is take that information, take the driving forces, and work up a couple of alternative policy scenarios. Well, you might be able to handle it this way or this way. These are reasonable ways to handle or achieve those visions. Once that's done, then that will be re-presented to the community, and we'll get more and more feedback from that. And then the resource teams will take that feedback and come up with a policy scenario that will try and incorporate all of that input to the process, and then we will discuss that with the community at large, discuss that with the steering committee and the planning commission. So we actively need you.
So in talking about how we wanted to engage and really get your assistance with Nashville Next, First and foremost, we know that a lot of you keep email listservs, you have Facebook pages, you have a lot of different ways that you reach out to your constituents, and we would sure love to tap into those, sending you materials if you would send them out as well. Also, if you are having community meetings, if your neighborhood associations are, your PTAs, your Rotaries, your Merchants Association, the Book a Planner is something that we would love to come out. And do let me stress that that's one part, us kind of giving the spiel on Nashville Next, but more importantly, it's us talking with them about some of the big questions about what we want to be in 25 years and getting in that moment feedback from them. And that's why we're excited about the Book a Planner, because there's some folks that just aren't going to do a planning department community meeting, but if we come to them, we can get some input from them. We can also help write little sections for newsletters that you might send out. If you want to announce it from the podium at your upcoming Easter egg hunt, anything like that, we can help with that, and we'd love to get the word out through you guys' networks. Also, we want to, and we will be continuing to do quarterly briefings with you all to let you know where we are in the process, answer any questions that you may have, take any feedback that you have right then. And we'll also have some continued discussion with committee chairs, because you saw from our list of topics that there are some topics that align very closely with your committees. And so we'll keep those avenues of conversation open as well. And then we need to enlist you to come to some different work sessions that are less about a briefing and more about kind of sitting down with you and having some interaction. In 2013, we're going to want to do the visioning with you all that we're doing with the community. And so this will be one part what you're hearing from your constituents, but it'll also be one part the unique perspective that you bring to this, and we want to see what kind of opportunities and challenges you see for Nashville's future. And Rick is going to come back to the 2 sessions with upcoming speakers that we think will be of particular interest to council members, and so we're asking these speakers to do a session just for council members. He'll come right back to that. In 2014, after the resource teams have put together a scenario of you can handle crime this way or that way, you can handle education this way, that way, or that way, we'd like to review those scenarios with you and see how you feel that they respond to the opportunities and challenges that you see in your role as a representative of Metro Nashville. And then in 2015, after we've done countless iterations and we've kind of nailed down the goals for the plan and like that, we would like your eyes on it for that kind of review and to get your feedback. Okay, now Rick will handle what's coming up next.
Okay, next is, most importantly, the finishing up of the speaker series. The first, I mentioned that Governor Glendening talked overall about kind of what was the state of the country. The next speaker after that was Mitchell Silver, and he talked about equity and inclusion, and then followed up by Henry Cisneros, who talked about prosperity. Doug Farr will be here a week from today. All of these speakers are speaking at 5:30. Doug Farr is a week from today at Scarrett Bennett. He's going to be talking about sustainable urbanism and talking about the environment. Ellen Dunham Jones is going to be here April 8th on livability. Bill Fulton is going to be, and I'll come back to her in a minute because this is the one opportunity, and then Bill Fulton's going to be here talking about infrastructure and smart growth, kind of the cost, how do we deal with matching infrastructure and growth that's coming forward. And then Amy Liu of the Brookings Institute will be here to talk about regionalism. On April 8th, this is whatever, I guess 3 weeks from today, what we would like to do, and what Ellen has agreed that she would love doing, is a special session with council members talking about how do you retrofit commercial corridors. She has written a book called Retrofitting Suburbia. She has has case studies from all over the country about how you come back in to make a corridor or even a general suburban environment more sustainable, more connected. And she would love to sit down. She's agreed to sit down and talk one-on-one or talk with the group, present you all some cases, present you some situations that she's found that have been particularly successful, and answer your questions. And we'll try to schedule that. We'll work with your staff and try to schedule something that hopefully as many of you as possible can attend. We're also looking to work with her. The Board of Realtors is trying to obtain a grant from their national organization where we would bring Ellen and her design studio. She's a professor. She's head of the urban design department at Georgia Tech University as a professor in their school, and she has a design studio that could come in and actually do a couple of field tests for this specific cases where we go in to areas and say, okay, how do we make these a little more sustainable? What are some intervention strategies that would be very practical for that? Bill Fulton is a former mayor out in California. He's an author. He is currently vice president of Smart Growth America. And he's going to come talking about infrastructure and smart growth. They received a federal grant and did an analysis of 2 cities in the country, Fresno, California, Fresno, right? And Nashville. And what they did was they really analyzed some development patterns to try to understand what the cost of development was, both short-term and long-term, both initial and ongoing. They did an analysis of Lenox Village and Bradford Hills, both across the street from each other, basically the same size. We limited it to the same size, 150 acres. And what they did was analyze the cost of the initial infrastructure going in there, the cost of ongoing maintenance, and the cost of upgrading that infrastructure and revenue from that. We also included, just as an alternative, the Gulch to kind of get a sense of where those are. So Bill's going to be able to present information about what some of the findings there were. We also have been working with Joe Minikazi, who's a urban planning expert and developer actually out of Asheville, North Carolina, who's doing an analysis of our tax structure in terms of property taxes. And he's done this for a lot of cities around the country. And what he has found, and I think he's finding much the same thing here, there are certain, the way the taxing process is going, there are certain disincentives for more efficient development patterns. For what you'll find is that, and what we'll find here is that if you own say a Walmart on 30 acres, that you pay less taxes per acre in terms of money than somebody that might live in an urban neighborhood on just a single family house. And it's partly built into the structure and the process that they go through. But what he will show is the importance of utilizing existing infrastructure, redeveloping corridors, and some of that from a tax point of view. And hopefully, I think that will be extremely informative. So we hope to have Bill actually doing a one-on-one and possibly Joe at the same time if we can pull that off. It may be that they're 2 separate ones, but they're particularly of interest to the council members, I think, in terms of your role, both in making decisions on priorities and infrastructure. Our resource teams, we're just beginning to formulate those. The first 2 will begin work in April. They tend to follow the speaker series by a couple of months, but the others, by July, we'll have all of them actively working, sifting through the community comments and beginning to go forward. So we have a number of online tools. We mentioned that. The easiest thing is to either contact myself or Jennifer, or you can have anyone contact us. Look at NashvilleNext.net, and there are ways to sign up, ways to ask for book a planner, ways to get access to MindMixer, access to any of the presentations that have been made, or the background reports. All of that information is there. Beginning in July and August, we'll have a series of community meetings. I didn't mention this, we're actually starting with the community plans. We're not starting from scratch. We're starting with community plans. We're starting with all the plans that have been taken. And so we're trying to bring those together. But we will have a series of community meetings throughout the county to allow the community to kind of come in and discuss the findings that we have by that time. As we get further along, we'll have a second round of community meetings in the fall. Middle part of 2014, we will have your review, as Jennifer mentioned, of the alternative scenarios, and then moving into the final plan and public hearings at council. So we'll be glad to try and answer any questions. It's important to us that if you've got any questions, you let us know. If you need information, we'd be glad to provide any information for you. One thing that I think Glendenning pointed out, and I'll say once again, and it is that this plan will only succeed if it actually reflects the values and desires of the community at large. And so, you know, we've got to have that engagement. We've got to have that understanding. And our job is to help provide people with what the implications are and help educate them so that they can make the right decisions as we go forward. So we need your help on that. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Okay, so we've got about 10, 12 minutes here. If we have questions, Councilman Westerholm, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, and thanks Rick, and thanks Jennifer. I know you guys and a lot of other folks put in a lot of work on this project, and I've been very excited to be able to attend some of those. Just a quick question, hopefully quick. In going back over the last couple of years and attending MPO meetings and things of that sort, we've seen various projections over the next 20, 25 years. And it seems like that number has been somewhere around 1 or 1.2 or 1.5 looking at the Nashville MSA. And one thing I've been trying to wrap my head around is the number that has been cited twice now is 200,000 in Davidson County. Is that number representative of something that we should do? And does that anticipate current growth patterns, current anticipated means of relationships to jobs, relationships to schools? I guess what I'm really asking is, a variety of different scenarios we could look at and say, if we were to absorb 400,000, if we were to absorb 600,000, what does that impact on our infrastructure, on our ability to finance that infrastructure? How does that make, how does that drive different decisions on development and transportation and schools and everything else?
That's a good question. The numbers themselves that we're using are all consistent with the MPO numbers. We're all using the same projections. The 800,000 plus in Davidson County is a projection based on current trends and current projections. Obviously, policy decisions could be made that could alter that and impact that. And I think that there are some significant opportunities to change that. One thing that we have, as we've gone through the community planning process and dealt with 14 different communities, individually, one thing or several things that they have come to a conclusion of is that part of the quality of life in Davidson County is the fact that we have kind of close-in, large lot suburban development patterns, and that's part of what's good about this community. The Creve Halls and the Donaldsons and the Madisons and the Westmeads and all of the Green Hills, all of those are part and unique to a city our size. And the downside of that is, as we all know, that was developed on septic tanks, and so it's not very efficient in terms of providing transit services or transportation services because you have a lot of area to cover. So what they've also said is the way to handle growth is to intensify the corridors, redevelop centers that are maybe being underutilized right now, and then strategically infill or redevelop small areas there to try to maintain that quality of life. So bottom line is, I don't see that changing as we work as a community at large. The good side is there's tremendous capacity along the corridors to handle probably as much, you could handle all the growth in this region along the corridors in a reasonable fashion. I think also that the demographic trends in terms of one-person households and both on boomers and Ys and the need to provide access to transit, all of those kind of things tend to fall together in terms of being an efficient expenditure of resources. So, and I think as you'll see in some of the tax studies, you're going to have a pretty much of a set cost of that infrastructure. If you're dividing it over a plus 200,000 or a plus 400,000, it's only, just lowers the cost per person. So I think those are things that have to be looked at. But you got to figure out what the trade-offs are and what the community willingness to understand and accept that is.
Councilor Allen.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell me a little bit about how the resource groups are being chosen, or if they already have heard? I had a number of people say, oh, I really want to participate, but I haven't heard back yet.
If you've got a name, let us have those names. Basically, the first couple we had like 90 names on the resource request. To make these functional, they need to be about 15 people. we're including the background authors, and we're including departments. Departments are over that number of 15. What we're trying to do is to make sure that all of the various elements of that topic are covered. We want a broad array of diversity of opinion, a diversity of groups that are there. We want them all, people with regional views, we want people with local views, people with certain expertise. And so we're trying to work with the steering committee or with people that are familiar with them. I mean, we've worked with our pillars, if you will, on some of these economic development. Do we have all the areas covered that we need to have covered in that? And so that's kind of how we're doing. It's certainly not, it's with a lot of thought, do we have everything covered? Is kind of what we're trying to get. If you get it too large, it won't function. If you don't get everybody covered, it's no good. So that's kind of our thinking.
Councilman Garrett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not to get confused with what one of the council members may be talking about satellite cities and things, are you including those satellite cities that have planning departments in your, I guess, your notifications and that type of thing? And are they participating?
I can answer that one. I had the opportunity recently to speak in front of the Tennessee chapter of the American Planning Association and spoke with the planners from the satellite cities at that. So I've touched base with them, and we will be engaging them as well, just as we do during our community planning efforts. They usually vary in how much they want to be involved, but we'll be reaching out to everybody and saying, hey, we'd like you to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. I want you to do that, because if they don't participate, it's their fault. If you don't contact them, it's our fault. Okay?
Also, just not that this would be of any interest to you, but we've already had extensive discussions with Rick Gregory in Goodlettsville, and we want to work in that area. So, one other thing too, because it's not only just the satellite cities. As you can see, the growth here comes across the county line. So we're working with the adjacent counties and jurisdictions around us. We've started this process by using their maps for their community plans, and we'll move forward. As we go forward, we will incorporate them even more as we look forward, because the world doesn't end just at the county boundary.
Councilman Glover?
A quick question for you. When you talked about in the last 5 years, we spent $1.2 billion on infrastructure cost in the city, county, and then the next 5 years is projected to be roughly $5 billion, if I remember the number correctly. Give me the definition of infrastructure. Is that strictly roads? Is it strictly bridges? Or is it buildings? Is it schools? What all does that encompass?
That one came from the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. You all know TASER. And they included everything from roads to water and stormwater, parks, schools, libraries. They ran the gamut in that assessment.
Okay, so then a follow-up question to that would be, if we look at 200,000 additional people between now and, was it 2040, I think it was, how does that actually lower our cost on a per person basis? Because it sounds like to me, just simple mathematics, that it actually is increasing it substantially.
Well, much of the infrastructure is not just a marginal cost for the next additional person. You have a whole segment that you can accommodate. We can accommodate a lot of additional growth just on the infrastructure we have now. Much of this is replacement infrastructure. Some of it is expansion infrastructure, and you can, in much of it, schools may be the one variable that would be a number-dependent variable. But when we put in a sewer line or a water line, they're always sized for a lot more people than are there now, and if you have the people there, they can simply be accommodated. Highways, there's going to be very little additional highway expansion for a whole lot of reasons, some environmental, some cost, and the fact that about 75% of the money now for highway money is going for just maintenance of existing highways. So trying to find a solution, a transit solution or an alternative solution mobility-wise is probably going to be the biggest single cost. We're also working with, there have been some ideas from some of the other departments about looking at regional systems, whether it's a regional water system or regional stormwater system, to handle some of these that are much more efficient in terms of cost efficiencies.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? Well, seeing no other lights, I want to thank you, Mr. Bernhardt and Jennifer, and members of the planning staff for being here and presenting this. thank each of you for making the effort to be here, that are a part of the Planning Zoning Committee, and others who have come in to participate. To those of you that came in from the outside and are sitting in the gallery back there, thank you for coming in to be a part of the afternoon. I would just encourage you, if you haven't already, to make a point to try to check out at least a couple of these speakers. I've attended one, watched one on the video replay, and they're quite provocative in some of the points that they bring up, getting you kind of think beyond where we are to where we want to be and need to be. And so I would just encourage you, Mr. Bernhardt, as soon as you can lock in the work session date on the 8th, that you let us know so that we can get that on the calendar to try to protect it. You know, the further out we get something on there, the greater chance there is that we'll be able to do it. And likewise with the April 22nd date.
Okay.
So thank you. Lots of good information and lots of work to be done, and we appreciate all the efforts that you're putting into this. So thank each of you for being here, and we're adjourned.